My grandson Oliver was 9 years old the morning. He asked me something that made me forget how to breathe. It was a Saturday in the middle of February, one of those cold, clear mornings in North Carolina where the sky goes a pale silver blue and the light comes in thin and honest. I had driven the 45 minutes from Greensboro to Durham the way I did most Saturday mornings, early, when the roads were still quiet, to pick Oliver up for what we called our weekend time. We'd been doing it since he was 4. Breakfast somewhere, sometimes a park, sometimes just sitting at my kitchen table working on a puzzle or watching birds out the back window. Nothing complicated, just time. His mother, my daughter Iris, worked night shifts at the hospital 3 or 4 nights a week. She was a registered nurse in the cardiac unit, had been for 6 years, and the hours were what they were. She was usually still asleep when I arrived on Saturday mornings. Her husband Kent answered the door. He always had that particular kind of friendliness that feels like a door left slightly open, warm enough on the surface, nothing behind it. He'd nod, say Oliver's ready, and that would be it. Oliver came out that morning with his jacket half-zipped and his backpack over one shoulder, the way he always did, that 9-year-old kind of organized chaos you stop trying to fix after a while. He had his mother's eyes, dark brown, and a gap in his front teeth from a tooth lost in November that hadn't grown back all the way. He climbed into the truck, and I handed him the small cooler I kept on the passenger seat. Chocolate milk, a banana, a granola bar, our standing arrangement. We were maybe 15 minutes into the drive when he said it. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching the pine trees go by out the window, and then in a voice that had no particular weight to it, like he was mentioning something that had just occurred to him, he said, "Grandpa, do you think it's weird that I can never remember falling asleep when Dad helps me with homework?" I kept my eyes on the road. I kept my voice exactly as it always was. "What do you mean, Bud?" He shifted in the seat. "Dad always gives me water before we start. He says it's focus water, supposed to help you concentrate." He paused. "But then I wake up and it's morning and I don't remember doing any of the homework. And Dad always says we finished it already." He looked out the window again. "I don't think that's how it's supposed to work." I drove for 3 or 4 seconds without answering. My hands were at 10 and 2. The road ahead of us was empty. "How often does this happen?" I asked. He thought about it. "Every time he helps me. Maybe since Christmas." I told him I wasn't sure about it, and that I'd look into it. I told him not to worry. I turned on the radio low, the way I used to do, when Iris was small and needed something to settle her, and we drove the rest of the way to my house talking about baseball, about the spring season coming up, about whether his team would have the same coach, about a kid on his team who could apparently throw a curveball, which at 9 is something nobody's supposed to be doing yet. He ate breakfast at my kitchen table, and we worked on the puzzle we'd started 2 weeks before. He was laughing by the time we got to the border section. I was smiling with him, and underneath all of it, something cold had settled in the center of my chest and was not moving. I spent 33 years teaching history and coaching baseball at a high school in Greensboro. You learn to read a room when you've stood in front of teenagers that long. You learn which quiet means boredom and which means something is wrong. You're wearing the watch all the time. You learn to ask the question that sounds like nothing while you wait for the answer that tells you everything. My wife Alma would have known what to do before I even finished telling her the first sentence. She had that in her, a clarity about people, about when something was off, that I had always admired and never quite matched. She passed 2 years ago, a heart attack, fast and without any warning, on a Tuesday afternoon in May while she was pulling weeds around the tomatoes in the back garden. I found her an hour later. I don't go to that part of the story often. What I know is that in 31 years of marriage, she was the person I reached for when something felt wrong and I didn't yet have proof. That Saturday morning, after Oliver fell asleep on the couch around noon, deeply and quickly, in a way I noticed, I sat at the kitchen table and missed her with a specific practical ache. The kind you feel when you need someone and they're not there and the needing doesn't have anywhere to go. Then I picked up the phone and called my doctor. He'd been my physician for 12 years. I have never been a man who overstates things, and he knew that. I told him what Oliver had said. I described the pattern, every time, since at least December, falling asleep mid-session, waking up with no memory, completed homework he couldn't account for. I told him about the water, and that the boy's father gave it to him and called it something to help him focus. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, "That needs to be investigated. Blood and urine today if you can manage it. Tell them you have reason to suspect possible sedation without the child's knowledge." The word sedation sat in my ear like something I wasn't ready to put down. Oliver was still asleep on the couch when I went in and sat beside him for a moment. He'd curled up under the quilt Alma had made the year before she died. Green and brown squares, she said they were baseball field colors. I watched him breathe for a while. Then I woke him gently and told him we were going to make a quick stop. Just a checkup kind of thing, might need a small blood draw. He made a face. He didn't argue. He never really argued about much, and until that moment I had taken that for easy temperament. I was starting to think it might be something else. The urgent care clinic was on the east side of Greensboro. The woman at the front desk had reading glasses on a beaded cord around her neck, and she looked at me. A 64-year-old man in a fleece jacket, bringing in a boy who clearly was not his son, with the careful neutrality those desks require. I leaned in close and said quietly that I was his grandfather, that I had reason to believe the boy had been given something without his knowledge or his mother's knowledge, and that I needed a full talk screen. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she reached for the phone. We were called back within 20 minutes. The doctor who came in was a compact man in his 40s with glasses and the kind of efficiency that makes you feel like you're in competent hands. He asked Oliver easy questions. How was school? What position did he play? How was his sleep lately? Oliver said he slept fine. He said he always felt tired in the mornings, even after a full night. He said sometimes he woke up and his homework was already finished in his backpack and he didn't remember doing any of it. The doctor's expression did not change. He was very good at that. He asked me to step into the hallway. I told Oliver I'd be right outside the door and put my hand briefly on his shoulder before I went. In the hallway, the doctor spoke in a low, measured voice. He said what Oliver had described was consistent with repeated administration of a sedating substance in a child. He said the tox screen would confirm. He said if the results came back positive for any sedative compound, he was required by law to contact Child Protective Services. I told him I understood. I told him to make the call if it came to that. He nodded once and we went back in. Oliver sat on the exam table eating a small bag of crackers the nurse had brought and told me more about the curveball kid from his baseball team. I listened. I responded at all the right moments. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. The results came back that afternoon. The doctor brought me into a small consultation room, closed the door, and set a printout on the table between us. He said the screen had come back positive for diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl, and in most over-the-counter sleep aids. He explained it steadily, the way someone does when they've delivered this kind of information before and understand how much weight each word carries. He said the levels were elevated well beyond anything that could be explained by accidental exposure. He said in a child of Oliver's size and age, administered consistently over weeks and months, the cumulative effects could include chronic fatigue, disrupted memory consolidation, difficulty with attention, and in prolonged cases, impact on cognitive development. He paused. He looked at me directly. This is not accidental, he said. The consistency and the levels make that clear. I've already placed the call to CPS. I had known it since the truck. Since Oliver said focus water and looked out the window at the pine trees like he was telling me something small. But hearing a doctor say it plainly in a fluorescent lit room made it real in a way that nothing else had. My hands were flat on the table in front of me. I looked at them. They looked calm. They didn't feel it. What happens now? I said. He told me not to return Oliver to the house that night. He gave me the number for the Family Advocacy Center. He told me to call my daughter. That was the one I had been sitting with since the parking lot. Iris was 34 years old. She had worked those night shifts at that hospital for 6 years and built something real. A career she was proud of, a son she loved completely, a front porch she'd painted herself the summer before last. She had married Kent 8 years ago, when Oliver was barely 1. Kent was in retail management, long hours, and he had always been the kind of man who filled a room without adding much to it. I had never said that to Iris. You don't say those things about your daughter's husband unless you're prepared for what comes after, and I was never ready for that. I sat in the parking lot of the urgent care with Oliver in the back seat finishing the rest of his crackers, and I called her. She answered on the third ring, groggy. She'd worked the night before. I told her I needed her to wake up and find somewhere quiet. A pause, then, Dad, what's wrong? It wasn't a question by the time she said it. I told her everything. I started with what Oliver had said in the truck. I went through the clinic, the tox screen, the results, what the doctor had said word for word, the CPS call. I told her Oliver was with me, that he was safe, and that I was not bringing him back to the house tonight. She was quiet for longer than felt possible on a phone. Then she said, "Tell me again about the water." I told her again. The sound she made after that, I don't have a word for it. It wasn't crying yet. It was something that comes before crying. When the body understands something, the mind is still trying not to accept. "I'm coming to your house," she said. I told her not to go home first. Come directly to me. She didn't ask why. She was there in under an hour. She came through my front door and went straight to Oliver, who was sitting at my kitchen table with a Lego set I'd stopped at the store to get on the way home. She pulled him in close and held him in the way that mothers do when they are scared through and through and will not let it show. I went and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard for a while. When she came to find me, Oliver was watching television on the couch. Her eyes were swollen, but she was steady. She had always had a steadiness that was entirely her own. She hadn't gotten it from me. She asked me why, not desperately, specifically, like a person trying to find the coordinates of something so she could figure out the next step. I told her I didn't have the full answer yet, that the caseworker would be there in the morning. The answer came in pieces over the following week, the way those answers do. It came from what Oliver shared in careful sessions with the CPS caseworker and the child advocate. It came from what the investigation uncovered, and it came, partly, from what a neighbor mentioned to the caseworker without being asked, something she'd noticed over the past several months and hadn't known what to do with. Kent had been having someone over to the house on the nights Iris worked, not every night. Regularly, 2, sometimes 3 nights a week. He would give Oliver the water about 40 minutes before she arrived. By the time she got there, Oliver was deeply asleep and stayed that way until morning. He had not wanted his son to see. He had not wanted his son to remember. He had used his own child as a problem to be managed. Iris sat at my kitchen table the evening after the caseworker came, both hands around a coffee mug she hadn't touched. She stared at the far wall for a long time. Then she said quietly, "I thought he was helping with homework. Oliver always had it done in the morning. I thought Kent was being a good father." I put my hand over both of hers and didn't say anything. There are some things you can't undo with an explanation. You can only be in the room with the person who's holding them. Kent denied everything when CPS came. He said Oliver must have gotten into the medicine cabinet on his own. He said the boy always slept heavily. He said I was an interfering old man who had never given him a fair chance. That last part had some truth in it, but the tox screen had a story his words couldn't reach. The levels were too high, too consistent over too many weeks. The bottle of children's liquid diphenhydramine found in the bathroom cabinet, with a small measuring dropper tucked on the shelf above it, told its own version of events. So did the pages in Oliver's school planner, where, in his careful 9-year-old handwriting, he had written "can't remember last night" on multiple mornings, going back to late fall. So did the neighbor, who told the caseworker she had seen the same car parked outside the house on Iris's work nights, over and over, for months. Kent was charged with child endangerment and reckless endangerment of a child. His attorney argued the charges were disproportionate. The prosecutor had the lab results, the bottle, the records, and a 9-year-old boy who told a child advocate, in his own words, that his dad always gave him the special water before bedtime, on the nights his mom wasn't home. Many of us who sat through those months felt what I felt, that whatever the court handed down would not feel sufficient. Iris felt it. I know I did. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of child endangerment. He received a suspended sentence, mandatory counseling, and 2 years of probation. Supervised visitation only, pending further review by the court. I sat with Iris the evening after the plea was entered. We didn't say much for a while. What I said eventually was that the court had done what courts do, and that protecting Oliver from this point forward was not their job. It was ours. She nodded slowly. She filed for divorce 9 days later. She did it without drama, the way she approached every necessary thing, because she had decided and there was nothing left to deliberate. Oliver stayed with me for 2 months while Iris found a new place. Those months were not uncomplicated. He had some trouble sleeping at first. Not from anything physical, which had cleared his system, but from the strangeness of everything shifting around him. He asked questions I didn't always have clean answers to. He asked whether his dad knew that he forgot things. He asked once, very quietly, whether what had happened was somehow connected to something he had done. I told him no, firmly, without any softness around the edges of it, because that kind of no has to be said without wobble. I told him that adults make choices that have nothing to do with how good you are or how much you deserve to be loved. I told him his mother and I had not made a single choice in 9 years that didn't have him at the center of it, and that was not going to stop. He would nod slowly, the way he does when he's taken something in but isn't done with it. Then he'd go back to his Lego sets, his baseball cards, the bird feeder we'd hung in the backyard together that February, which had attracted a pair of Carolina wrens he'd become quietly interested in. He'd found a used field guide at a library sale and had started keeping a small chart of every bird we'd seen and how many times. It was taped to my refrigerator with one of Alma's old magnets. I thought about Alma a great deal during those months. I thought about what she would have said to him. I believe she would have found a way to make the heaviness feel smaller without pretending it wasn't there. She had that gift. I did what I could with what I had. By April, Oliver's pediatrician had completed a full developmental evaluation. The doctor, a woman with silver-streaked hair and the steadiness of someone who has done hard things for a long time, went through the results with Iris and me while Oliver waited outside with a book. She said his cognitive function was solidly within normal range. She said his attention scores were slightly below the midpoint for his age, but not alarmingly so, and that with stable circumstances and normal development, she expected them to trend back over the following months. Iris asked her directly whether there would be lasting effects. The doctor looked at both of us. She said she could not offer guarantees. She said the most protective factors now were consistency, routine, and the presence of people who paid close attention. She said it was clear from everything Oliver had shared in his sessions that he had all of those things. I drove home from that appointment the long way, through the neighborhoods where I used to take Alma on slow evening drives when the light went long and orange. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a few minutes before going inside. The bird feeder was visible through the backyard gate. Both wrens were there. Oliver's chart was still on my refrigerator. I'd read the entry from that morning. Carolina wren, 2. He'd drawn a small bird next to it with a ballpoint pen, which was not a perfect representation, but it was unmistakably a bird. I thought about the drive in February, the pine trees, the ordinary voice of a 9-year-old boy saying something that didn't sound like much. I thought about how easy it would have been not to hear it, to let it pass, to decide I was reading too much into a tired kid's offhand comment on a Saturday morning. I have thought about that more times than I can count. How small the moment was, how completely everything turned on it. Iris found a house in Chapel Hill in late March. Smaller, good school district. A backyard with a garden bed she was already drawing plans for. Oliver started his new school in April. His teacher sent a note home at the end of the first week saying he was engaged, curious, and had already made 2 friends at his table. He plays on a spring baseball league now. I go to every game I can make the drive for. I bring the same folding chair I've been bringing to youth baseball games since Iris played t-ball 30 years ago. And I sit behind the third base line and watch Oliver play second base with the particular focused seriousness of a kid who understands that the game asks something from you and is willing to give it back. After games, we've fallen into a habit of stopping at a diner near the field. Eggs and toast, orange juice. I noticed early on that Oliver always glances at his glass when the juice arrives. Just a look, just a second before he picks it up. He doesn't say anything when he does it. I don't say anything either. Some things you just make room for without naming them. One Sunday evening, a few weeks into the new school, we were finishing dinner at my kitchen table. Iris was in the other room on a phone call, and Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Were you scared, Grandpa, when I told you about the water in the truck?" I thought about giving him the easy answer, the grandfather answer, the one that reassures without asking much of the listener. Then I thought about who he was and what he'd already been through, and I told him the truth. I told him yes. I told him I had been frightened in a way I didn't have a precise word for. He turned that over. He ran his finger along one of the knots in the wood grain of the table, the way he does when he's working something out. "But you didn't seem scared," he said. "No," I said, "I didn't." "How come?" I told him that when someone you love needs something from you, the fear doesn't go away. You just don't let it be the thing that makes the decisions. I told him that's not something anyone is born knowing. It's something you practice over and over until it becomes the way you move. He nodded once, slowly, the nod he uses when he's filed something away somewhere he'll come back to. "I can practice that," he said. Iris came back in and sat down and poured herself more water, and didn't know what had just passed between us at that table. I didn't tell her then. I just watched the two of them together and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite happiness, but something quieter than that and more durable. The specific feeling of something that came close to going very wrong and didn't. Oliver got his dog in June, a beagle, his choice. After 2 weeks of careful research involving the library, several YouTube videos, and a very detailed pro and con list, he presented to Iris. He named him Cooper. Cooper is loud and enthusiastic and has already eaten one of my good baseball caps, and Oliver thinks every single thing Cooper does is a work of absolute genius. He is, of course, correct. I see them most Sundays now. Iris cooks. Oliver tells me what Cooper did that week, and we eat together at my kitchen table with the knotted wood grain. He remembers things now the way children are supposed to remember them. In sequence. One day connected to the next. The thread of the week intact when he wakes up in the morning. He reminds me sometimes of things I've said to him weeks ago that I've already forgotten I said. He keeps track. I have been a teacher for most of my working life. 33 years trying to help young people understand that history is not only what happened, but the choices people made in ordinary moments. The small ones, the unglamorous ones, the ones that didn't look like choices at the time. I think about Oliver in that truck in February. The way he looked out the window at the pine trees going by and said the words like they were almost nothing. Like he wasn't sure they were worth saying, but said them anyway. He didn't know what he was handing me. He was just telling his grandfather something that had been bothering him, and trusting, without even knowing he was trusting, that I would know what to do with it. I heard him. That is the only thing I am certain I did right. Everything else followed from that. If you have someone small in your life, a grandchild, a child, a niece or nephew or neighbor kid who comes around, and they say something that sounds like nothing but doesn't sit right with you, don't let it go. Don't tell yourself you're making something out of very little. Don't decide the disruption isn't worth it, or the family tension isn't worth it, or that you'll probably feel differently about it by Monday. Ask the question, make the call, take them to someone who can check. Because they are telling you. In whatever words they have, at whatever angle they can manage, they are handing you the thing they don't know how to name and trusting that you will hear it. Hear it.